What if I told you there was a serial killer so methodical? He buried weapons in random locations across America years before he planned to use them. On the 2nd of December 2012, an FBI agent stepped into a maximum security jail cell in Anchorage, Alaska. On the floor, beneath the dead body of Israel Keyes, they found 11 pieces of paper. Each one showed a human skull hand-painted in blood, his own blood. One skull had a chilling message scrawled beneath it. We are one. The FBI believes those 11 skulls represent his 11 victims. But here's the terrifying part. They've only identified 3. Israel Keyes didn't just kill people. He turned murder into a science. For over a decade, he traveled across the country, burying kill kits, studying FBI tactics, and choosing victims at random. He had no type, no preference, no pattern. If you crossed his path on the wrong day, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, you became a target of opportunity. Keyes called it fishing for humans. By the time the FBI caught him, he had perfected a method of killing that was virtually undetectable. But one mistake, a single crack in his perfect system, would lead to his capture. The story of Israel Keyes will change how you think about serial killers forever. Because everything you think you know about these monsters is wrong. Israel Keyes was born on the 7th of January, 1978, in Cove, Utah, as the second of 10 children. His parents, Heidi and John Jeffrey Keyes, didn't believe in government interference, public schools, or modern medicine. When Israel was 5, the family moved to Colville, Washington, where they lived completely isolated in the woods. No heat, no electricity, no contact with the outside world. But it gets worse. While in Washington, Keyes' parents left the Mormon Church, became fundamentalist Christians, and joined a white supremacist organization called the Ark. Imagine growing up in that environment. Complete isolation from society, combined with teachings that other races were inferior and that violence was justified in God's name. Israel grew up hunting, breaking into neighbors' homes to steal guns and torturing animals, behavior that experts have linked directly to psychopathy. Years later, while in FBI custody, Keyes would say, "I've known since I was 14 that there were things that I thought were normal and okay that nobody else seemed to think were normal and okay." When Israel was a teenager, he told his family he no longer shared their faith. Their response: they evicted him from the family home and told his younger siblings never to speak to him again. At 18, completely cut off from his family, Israel did what many lost young men do. He joined the army. But the military didn't fix Israel Keyes. It gave him skills. On the 9th of July, 1998, Keyes enlisted and eventually became a specialist in Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry Regiment. He passed the rigorous Army Rangers training course and was stationed at Fort Hood in Texas, Fort Lewis in Washington, and even Sinai, Egypt. His fellow soldiers described him as a loner who drank heavily on weekends. But there was something else, something darker. While stationed in Egypt, Keyes reportedly told a fellow soldier that he would like to kill him. No one took it seriously at the time. In February 2001, Keyes received a DUI. his only legal trouble during military service. He was honorably discharged that same year and settled on the Maca Reservation in Nia Bay, Washington. That's where everything changed. In 2000, Keyes became involved with a woman on the reservation. In 2001, their daughter was born. For a brief moment, it seemed like Israel Keyes might become a normal person, a father, a contributing member of society. He worked for the Maca Tribal Council from 2001 to 2007. He appeared to be a reliable employee, a dedicated father. But appearances can be deceiving because, according to Keyes's own confession, 2001 was also the year he committed his first murder. While presenting himself as a loving father and responsible worker, Israel Keyes was secretly developing a system for hunting human beings. And his system was unlike anything law enforcement had ever seen before. Most serial killers have patterns. They target specific types of victims: young women, elderly men, prostitutes, hitchhikers. They operate in familiar geographic areas. They leave signatures at crime scenes. Israel Keyes had none of that. His method was based on pure randomness, which made him virtually impossible to track. Here's how it worked. Years before he planned to kill, Keyes would travel across the United States, burying what he called kill caches in remote locations. These weren't just random hiding spots. They were carefully selected locations near populated areas where he might want to hunt in the future. Inside each cache, Keyes would bury plastic containers filled with everything he needed to commit murder: handguns, ammunition, knives, zip ties, plastic sheeting for body disposal, even homemade silencers. The FBI has confirmed that Keyes buried caches in at least 4 states, though they suspect there were many more. When Keyes felt the urge to kill, he would travel to one of these locations, dig up his cache, and begin hunting. But here's what made his method so terrifying. He didn't choose his victims in advance. He would simply drive around until he found someone vulnerable, someone alone, someone he could overpower. Not as much to choose from, in a manner of speaking. Keyes later told FBI investigators, "But there's also no witnesses, really. There's no one else around." He often waited in parks, cemeteries, or campgrounds, places where people went to be alone, where screams wouldn't be heard. Keyes studied the work of FBI profilers extensively. He learned about every technique law enforcement used to track serial killers, and he specifically designed his methods to avoid detection. He paid for everything in cash. He removed the battery from his cell phone while traveling to avoid being tracked. He never used his real name when checking into hotels. Most importantly, he never killed near his home in Alaska. He would travel thousands of miles, commit his crimes, and return home before anyone even knew a murder had occurred. To fund his killing sprees, Keyes worked as a contractor through his own business, Keyes Construction. The FBI has confirmed he robbed banks in Tupper Lake, New York, and Azle, Texas, using the stolen money to finance his cross-country hunting trips. Keyes even visited Mexico, where he reportedly got a gastric band to reduce his hunger during long hunts, and possibly visited plastic surgery clinics. Some experts believe he was trying to alter his fingerprints or remove body hair to avoid leaving evidence. For over a decade, this system worked perfectly. But every system has weaknesses, and Israel Keyes was about to discover that even the most carefully planned method can be undone by human emotion. Because in February 2012, something happened that would make Keyes abandon everything he had learned about careful, methodical killing. something that would lead to his capture, his confession, and ultimately, his death. His first planned attack took place in Oregon in 1997 or 1998, when he was still a teenager. He abducted a teenage girl and raped her. He intended to kill her, but she managed to convince him to let her go. "I wasn't violent enough," Keyes later told investigators. "I made up my mind I was never going to let that happen again." That failure haunted him. It taught him that hesitation was weakness, that mercy was a mistake. When he began killing, for real, in 2001, Israel Keyes showed no mercy. His confirmed victims include a couple from Vermont and at least one person on the East Coast, though the FBI believes he killed many more. In June 2011, Keyes flew to Chicago, then drove to Essex, Vermont, where he murdered Bill and Lorraine Currier. This case shows exactly how his method worked. Keyes spent days driving around Essex, studying different houses, looking for the perfect target. He had specific criteria: no children in the home, no dog that might bark and alert neighbors, and an attached garage where he could break in without being seen. Bill and Lorraine Currier fit his requirements perfectly. On the night of the 8th of June, 2011, Keyes broke into their home through the garage. He subdued the couple with zip ties and duct tape, then forced them into his rental car. But Keyes didn't kill them in their home. That would have been too risky, too likely to leave evidence. Instead, he drove them to an abandoned farmhouse he had scouted earlier, a place where no one would hear their screams. He killed Bill first, then raped Lorraine before murdering her. Keyes later told FBI investigators that he chose the Curriers completely at random. They had done nothing wrong. They were simply in the wrong place when a predator was hunting. After killing them, Keyes burned down the farmhouse with their bodies inside, then calmly drove back to Alaska as if nothing had happened. The Vermont State Police investigated the Curriers' disappearance for months, but found no leads, no witnesses, no evidence pointing to a suspect. Israel Keyes had committed the perfect crime. But the FBI believes the Curriers were just two of many victims. Keyes claimed he killed 4 people in Washington state between 2001 and 2006. He said he murdered someone on the East Coast in 2009, leaving the body in New York State. The FBI is relatively confident that this victim was Deborah Feldman, a New Jersey woman who went missing in April 2009. Each murder was meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. Keyes would study his hunting grounds for days, select his victims carefully, and dispose of the evidence so thoroughly that many of his crimes were never even classified as murders. Missing persons cases, unsolved disappearances, people who simply vanished without a trace. But Keyes was getting bolder, more confident, more careless. And in February 2012, that confidence would lead him to make the one mistake that would end his killing spree forever. The 1st of February 2012, Anchorage, Alaska, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was working the evening shift at a roadside espresso stand called Common Grounds. Samantha was a beautiful, vibrant teenager with her whole life ahead of her. She was popular at school, had a loving boyfriend, and was saving money for college. She had no idea that for the past several days, Israel Keyes had been watching her. This wasn't part of Keyes's usual method. He typically traveled thousands of miles from his home in Alaska to commit his crimes. But something about Samantha had caught his attention. Maybe it was the isolated location of the coffee stand. Maybe it was the fact that she worked alone during evening shifts. Or maybe, after years of methodical killing, Keyes was simply losing control. At 8 p.m., as Samantha was preparing to close the stand, a man approached the window. She recognized him. He had been a customer several times over the past week, always polite, always ordering the same thing. But tonight was different. Security camera footage shows what happened next. Instead of placing an order, the man suddenly dove through the open window of the coffee stand. That man was Israel Keyes. Keyes forced Samantha to turn off the lights and empty the cash register. Then he zip-tied her hands and led her to his truck, which was parked nearby. But Keyes didn't kill Samantha immediately. Instead, he drove her to his house, another departure from his usual method. At his home, Keyes sexually assaulted Samantha, then strangled her to death. But even after killing her, Keyes wasn't finished. The next day, Keyes left on a planned family vacation, a 2-week cruise in the Gulf of Mexico with his girlfriend and daughter. He left Samantha's body in a shed behind his house, frozen in the Alaskan winter. When Keyes returned from his cruise 2 weeks later, he committed one of the most disturbing acts in the history of American crime. He retrieved Samantha's frozen corpse from the shed, brought it into his house, and applied makeup to her face. He sewed her eyes open with fishing line to make her appear alive. Then he positioned her body next to a recent issue of the Anchorage Daily News and took a photograph. Using Samantha's own cell phone, Keyes sent the photo to her family along with a ransom demand for $30,000. Samantha's family, believing their daughter was still alive, desperately scraped together the money and deposited it in her bank account. But Samantha was already dead. She had been dead for weeks. After collecting the ransom money, Keyes dismembered Samantha's body and dumped the pieces in a frozen lake north of Anchorage. Then he began using her ATM card. This was Keyes's fatal mistake. His method had always been based on complete anonymity. No electronic trails, no financial records, no way for law enforcement to track his movements. But his obsession with Samantha Koenig had made him careless. Every time Keyes used Samantha's ATM card, he was creating an electronic record of his location, and law enforcement was watching. After collecting the ransom money in Alaska, Keyes began a road trip to Texas to visit his mother. Along the way, he continued using Samantha's card in New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. Each transaction was photographed by ATM security cameras. On the 13th of March, 2012, Texas law enforcement pulled over a vehicle matching the description of Keyes's rental car. Inside, they found Samantha Koenig's license, along with other evidence linking Keyes to her disappearance. After more than a decade of perfect crimes, Israel Keyes had finally been caught. But the story was far from over. Israel Keyes was arrested and extradited back to Alaska, where he was housed in the maximum security Anchorage Correctional Complex. For the FBI, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. They finally had one of the most methodical serial killers in American history in custody. But getting information from Keyes would prove to be a psychological chess match unlike anything investigators had ever experienced. Special agents Jolene Godin and Catherine Nelson were assigned to interview Keyes. Over the next 7 months, they would conduct dozens of interrogation sessions, trying to extract details about his other victims. Keyes enjoyed the process. He seemed to take pleasure in controlling the flow of information, giving investigators just enough detail to keep them interested, but never enough to solve his other crimes. The information that I still have could come in handy, Keyes chuckled during one interview. He was bargaining. He would provide details about specific murders in exchange for certain accommodations, better food, more recreation time, guarantees about how his case would be handled. It was during these interviews that Keyes revealed the true scope of his crimes. He confessed to killing Bill and Lorraine Currier in Vermont, providing details that only the killer could know. He described murders in Washington State, New York, and other locations. But he also made it clear that the FBI would never learn the full truth. Once I started, there was nothing else like it, he told investigators. When asked about his total number of victims, Keyes was deliberately vague. Sometimes he said less than a dozen. Other times he hinted at more. But Keyes had his own timeline for these revelations. He didn't want to spend years in prison, slowly giving up information in exchange for small privileges. He wanted a quick execution. I want my kid to have a chance to grow up, Keyes told investigators. She's in a safe place now. She's not going to see any of this. I want her to have a chance to grow up and not have all this hanging over her head. Keyes was scheduled to go to trial in March 2013. Federal prosecutors were considering pursuing the death penalty. But Keyes had no intention of living that long. In his jail cell, guards noticed that he had begun engaging in strange behavior. He would stay up all night, moving around his cell, arranging and rearranging items. What they didn't realize was that Keyes was preparing for his final act. The 1st of December, 2012, Israel Keyes was housed in the maximum security Bravo module of the Anchorage Correctional Complex. He was considered a high-value prisoner, subject to the strictest security protocols. Earlier that year, Keyes had been found with a makeshift noose in his cell and had been placed on suicide watch. But after evaluation by mental health professionals, he was determined to no longer be a suicide risk. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. Correctional Officer Lauren Jacobson was working the overnight shift responsible for monitoring 15 prisoners, including Keyes. Jacobson was supposed to conduct visual inspections of each cell every 30 minutes. At 10:12 p.m., Jacobson observed Keyes arranging items in his cell before getting into bed. Everything appeared normal. But Israel Keyes was methodical in everything he did, including his own death. Sometime after 10:12 p.m., Keyes hid under his blankets and began his final ritual. He had somehow obtained a razor blade, a security failure that would later lead to Jacobson's termination. Using the razor, Keyes slashed his wrist, letting his blood flow onto sheets of paper he had prepared. With his own blood, he painted 11 human skulls. Under one of them he wrote, "We are one." The FBI believes these skulls represent his 11 victims, 10 murders, plus himself. But Keyes wasn't finished. After painting the skulls, he used a makeshift noose fashioned from bedsheets to strangle himself. On surveillance video, movement can be seen in Keyes' cell until 10:24 p.m. Then everything goes still. Keyes was dead. But Jacobson, who was reading a novel and browsing the internet during his shift, didn't discover the body until lights came on the next morning at 6 a.m. Israel Keyes had been dead for over 7 hours. Beneath his body, investigators found not only the blood-painted skulls, but also a 4-page suicide note. The note was rambling, often rhyming, and filled with contempt for American society. Keyes criticized consumerism, celebrated his murders, and showed no remorse for his victims. You may have been free. You loved living your lie. Fate had its own scheme. Crushed like a bug, you still die, Keyes wrote. But the note provided no investigative leads, no clues about his other victims, no closure for the families, still searching for answers. FBI Special Agent Mary Rook later said, "The writings do not offer any investigative clues or leads as to the identity of other possible victims." With Keyes' death, the investigation into his other crimes came to an abrupt halt. The families of his unknown victims would never get answers. The FBI's chance to solve multiple cold cases died with him. Israel Keyes had won his final psychological game. Even in death, he maintained control over the information that could have brought peace to grieving families. Israel Keyes was buried on the 8th of December, 2012. Only 7 people attended his funeral: his mother, 4 sisters, and 3 brothers-in-law. No one mourned the loss of Israel Keyes, but his death left behind a trail of unsolved murders, grieving families, and questions that may never be answered. The FBI continues to investigate cases that might be connected to Keyes. They've released information about his travels, his methods, and his possible victims, hoping someone will come forward with information. Special Agent Catherine Nelson, who interviewed Keyes extensively, remains committed to finding his other victims. "It won't be easy by any means," Nelson said, "and it may take a long time, but I'll never give up trying." But here's what makes Israel Keyes so terrifying. His method worked. For over a decade, he killed people across the United States without being detected. He turned murder into a science, eliminating every element that typically helps law enforcement catch serial killers. No victim type, no geographic pattern, no signature, no electronic trail. If he hadn't become obsessed with Samantha Koenig, if he hadn't used her ATM card, he might never have been caught. Keyes once told investigators that he had planned to leave Alaska and travel to storm-ravaged regions where he could find vulnerable victims while working as a contractor. He dreamed of building a house where he could imprison victims, similar to H.H. Holmes's murder castle. He was evolving, getting better at killing. The FBI describes Israel Keyes as one of the most meticulous serial killers in American history, but perhaps more frightening is the possibility that his methods are being studied and copied by other potential killers. Keyes studied the techniques that caught other serial killers and specifically designed his methods to avoid those mistakes. What if someone is now studying Israel Keyes? While the FBI believes Israel Keyes killed 11 people, only 3 have been definitively confirmed. Samantha Koenig, 18, of Anchorage, Alaska. A beautiful, vibrant teenager who was saving money for college. She died because she was in the wrong place when a predator was hunting. Bill Currier, 50, and Lorraine Currier, 55, of Essex, Vermont. A loving couple who had done nothing wrong except live in a house that fit Israel Keys's criteria for the perfect crime. These three people had families who loved them, friends who missed them, futures that were stolen by one man's methodical evil. But what about the other 8 victims? The FBI believes one of them was Deborah Feldman, who disappeared from New Jersey in 2009, but her body has never been found, and her family still doesn't have closure. There are other cases that investigators suspect might be connected to Keys. Julie Harris, who disappeared from Colville, Washington, in 1996. Her prosthetic feet were found a month after she vanished. Keys was in the area at the time but denied involvement. Mary Cooper, 56, and her daughter Susanna Stodden, 27, who were shot while hiking in Washington State in 2006. But without confessions or physical evidence, these cases remain officially unsolved. Somewhere in America, there are families who still don't know what happened to their loved ones. They don't know that their missing father, mother, daughter, or son crossed paths with Israel Keys on the worst day of their lives. Those families deserve answers. They deserve closure. They deserve justice. But Israel Keys took those answers to his grave. He proves that our understanding of serial killers is dangerously incomplete. We think they're disorganized. Keys was methodical. We think they have victim types. Keys chose randomly. We think they operate in familiar areas. Keys traveled thousands of miles to kill. We think they leave signatures. Keys left nothing. For over a decade, Israel Keys operated completely under the radar, killing people across America while maintaining the perfect cover of a small business owner and devoted father. He was a ghost, a shadow, a predator, so skilled that he might never have been caught if he hadn't made one crucial mistake. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Israel Keys isn't what he did. It's what he represents. In an age of surveillance cameras, cell phone tracking, and advanced forensics, Keys proved that a sufficiently intelligent and methodical killer can still operate undetected. He showed that the randomness we think protects us, the idea that we're safe because we're not targeted, can actually make us more vulnerable. Because somewhere out there, right now, another predator might be studying Israel Keys's methods, learning from his mistakes, improving his techniques, burying caches of weapons in remote locations, selecting victims completely at random, fishing for humans. The Israel Keys case isn't just about one serial killer. It's about the evolution of evil itself. And it should keep you awake at night.